Joining us now live tonight is King 5 political analyst and former Washington Attorney General Rob McKenna. Rob, good to see you.
Good to see you, Joyce.
Okay, first, what are the main sticking points among GOP members that threaten to derail the package?
Well, it's the national debt. You know, in the time we have this little conversation, about $3 million more will be added to the U.S. national debt, which is being grown by the difference between U.S. tax revenues and federal government spending. There's about a $2 trillion current deficit, $7 trillion of spending, $5 trillion in federal tax revenues. So the differences really among conservatives in Congress come down to what to do about this debt before the bond market makes the decision for us.
As you know, House Speaker Mike Johnson can only afford 3 GOP defectors on the floor. So what specific concessions need to be made to win over the key Republican holdouts?
Well, it appears that addressing entitlement spending is number one because the conservatives, the fiscal hawks, want to address Medicaid spending and impose work requirements for Medicaid. The White House itself admits that there are about 4 million people who are able-bodied who are still entitled to Medicaid benefits. They want to basically require people to work to obtain benefits and, to go to work if they're able to.
And the bill includes some major tax cuts and spending reductions with big concerns about its impact, as you mentioned, on the deficit. So how are lawmakers justifying the changes, even with warnings that the bill could really push the deficit higher?
Well, what I'm hearing is that they're saying that the American people want it both ways. They want tax reductions, but they also want full benefits. They want the spending. And one contact I have on Capitol Hill said until the bond market, in other words, till U.S. debt is downgraded and we have a kind of fiscal crisis, Americans won't accept the idea that they're going to be, that we need to have less spending and higher taxes to reduce the deficit and get the debt under control. It's really depressing to think that Congress is waiting for that crisis to occur. But on the one side, you've got progressives arguing vociferously for more spending. On the other hand, you have Republicans demanding tax cuts, including the White House says a 15% tax reduction for people making between $30,000 and $80,000 a year, for example, by not taxing tips. So, this is a replay of something that's been going on for a very long time, where one side wants more spending, the other side wants, tax reduction. The difference results in annual multi-trillion-dollar deficits that are really obviously becoming unsustainable.
I have about a minute left. I want to talk about the president's recent tour of the Middle East, where he made several major announcements lifting sanctions on Syria, economic deals with the UAE and Qatar, doubling down on his desire to accept that $400 million aircraft as a gift from Qatar. What legal or constitutional concerns do you see with that trip and the deals made?
Well, the deals are not necessarily constitutionally problematic if what they're talking about is, countries in the Middle East buying more Boeing airplanes, for example, or agreeing to make investments in the United States for artificial intelligence. Accepting a $400 million aircraft, that's a different matter. I suppose it depends on who the plane is being given to. Is it being given to President Trump or is it being given to the U.S. federal government? So we'll have to see how that plays out. I'm really skeptical that actually will ever happen. But what I think the bigger picture shows us is that Trump has really done a 180 from the approach that the last Republican president took, that is to say, who wasn't Trump, George W. Bush. That was during, the period where we thought we could export American democratic ideals to the Middle East and to other countries that are not particularly democratic. Trump is using a different tactic. It's all about deal making, not exporting American principles of democracy. So he's hoping that he can achieve peace in the Middle East by binding together the major players economically. And that's one of the reasons that he apparently decided to suspend or say he would suspend these sanctions against Syria. I think he's trying to take advantage of Iran's weakness, and he's trying to build a strong coalition among, U.S. allies in the Middle East in hopes that that will produce peace. Because he's not achieving it so far in Ukraine. He's not achieving it in the Gaza Strip. So he's looking for gains where he can get them.
They're wrapping me, but they say I have time for one more question briefly.
All right.
The president's trip comes after years of tension over his own travel bans rhetoric, his rhetoric toward Muslim communities.
Yeah.
So how do you interpret a shift in tone? What should Americans, especially Muslim Americans, watch for in terms of policy versus diplomacy?
I think that his policy is to make America, a closer ally of Muslim countries like Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, and Syria. So that should be welcome news. This is a very different presidency than Trump 45's was. As they've been saying at the White House, this is about commerce, not chaos. And at least in terms of the deals that he was announcing, if they're real, if they happen, he seems to be achieving that anyway.
Rob McKenna, always so good to have you, and it's so great to have your insight. Thanks for joining us tonight. We appreciate it.
Always a pleasure, Joyce. Thank you.